Hey, in this video I'm going to explain how to use Microthemer's HTML and CSS inspection tools. And in the process I'm going to teach you just enough HTML and CSS so that you can make the most of them. So to open the inspection tools we go down to the bottom left and click Inspect. I'm also going to just bring these up a little bit so you can see a bit more. So in this pane here on the left, Microthemer displays the full HTML for the whole page. Okay, but you rarely have to deal with that much information, because if we say click on this element here, what Microthemer shows us with the highlighted line, and it scrolls to the correct position in the HTML, is the exact element that we clicked. So I've got this list item here that says click anything on the page, and that matches up to the text that we can already see where it says click anything on the page and anything is in bold. And the word anything is encased in a strong HTML element here. Now, because Microthemer is a tool just for styling the HTML content, it's not something you can use to edit the HTML content. We can't actually change the content here, but we can use it as an alternative way of selecting elements. If I click on this line here, you can see that the highlighting is updated and we've now selected this ordered list element. So one thing that HTML allows us to do is to style different pieces of content differently. So we've just seen that I've mentioned here this strong tag. That allows us to set the word anything here to bold. So let's talk for a moment about how to actually understand what this HTML means. We're just going to focus on a very small section here, and I'll explain what it all means, and then hopefully you can apply that to understanding HTML where you see it in other places. So firstly, what we have here is the word, the letters, O and L, and that stands for ordered list, and that's the name of this HTML tag. Ordered lists are used when you want to display items like this, where you've got bullet-pointed items with numbers instead of actual bullet points. If you wanted like circles, for instance, that would be a different HTML element called unordered list, and it would say UL here instead. So in terms of these little pointy bits, these angle brackets, they're just used to identify when a HTML element starts and when it ends. So notice here you've got OL, you've got a pointy bracket, you've got OL, and then down here you've got the same OL, but there's a forward slash. Basically, if there isn't a forward slash, it means it's the start. If it's just a just a pointy bracket and then the tag name. If there is a forward slash, that means with the same tag name as up here, then that means that's the end of the element. And HTML elements can have attributes. So this particular one has a class attribute with the value basic usage. Sometimes HTML elements can have multiple classes, as you can see with this example here, where it's got a class called mtiff and then another class called mtiff_cog. When there's multiple, they're separated by a space inside the little quotes here. And if we look over on the right here for Microthemer's CSS selector suggestions, you can see that it's referencing our basic usage class. The purpose of this little dot here is to identify that we're referencing a class rather than an ID. IDs are also commonly used. They are referenced using the hash mark here. So if we look at post 2, that wasn't it? So here we go. Here's a HTML element called article, and if we look over here we can see it has an ID attribute of post 2. I'll explain a bit about that, what that means exactly in a moment. The next thing I want to talk about is nesting. So HTML elements often have other elements nested inside, and that's shown here with a slight indentation. So this element here has a list element nested inside, and inside this list element there is a strong element as well for making this text bold, which we've seen before. So with our ordered list element here, Microthemer is actually referencing two attributes here. It's referencing the post2 ID on the article element, and it's also referencing the class here. And when a selector has a space in between it, and it's using to reference two portions of the HTML markup, the first bit sets the context. So post2 means, okay, I want target the context here for targeting is an element with an ID of post2, and inside that I want to target an element that has a class of basic usage. It's quite common to want to target an element either by say a fairly generic class name or just its tag name, but inside a specific context. That way you know that your styles are only going to apply to a limited context and not apply elsewhere on the site or in other parts of the page that you're not intending to. On the subject of making sure that your styles apply to only the current page you're looking at, you can enable this option here, and that will basically apply a class that exists on the body tag, which is unique to the current page, and by setting that as the container context, we ensure that our selectors only apply to the current page we're looking at over here. While I'm on the subject of these options here, there's also a shortcut for setting a hover state, and what that would do is just target this content, this list item, but only when the user is hovering their mouse on it. So if we were to set some styles here, that would only apply when the user hovers their mouse over the element. And these two options here, they're just a shortcut for using one of the options here, like hover or page ID. They're just the two most common, but there's a full set here which you can go through. If you hover over each one, it tells you what it does. Okay, so we've talked about the fact that this ID sets the container context for targeting our ordered list, which has this class, but we don't have to choose the default option here. The default option is always the first option in this drop-down list, but there's plenty of other options we can choose from. And sometimes we might not want to use the ID. And by the way, you can actually just go ahead and customize these selectors however you want. You could delete that. But you also might want to use this option here, where the default option is to set the specificity to high. So that's where Microthemer favors selectors that use some sort of ID as a container context. But if we set this to low, Microthemer will prioritize selectors that just reference classes instead of IDs. And because our ordered list element happens to have a class on it itself, there's no need to specify a container context. And it's worth mentioning that these options here for setting the low or high specificity, they only change the what appears on top, the default selector. So both of those, one with the ID and then the one just by itself, basic usage, they're both still available. They're just in a different order in the list, and therefore they appear here as the default suggestion or not. And so this can just save you some time searching, basically. So let's look at another example now. If I click on this element here, which is it's an icon element, so the icon is set via CSS, and it's just on a span element. Span elements are just very generic HTML elements. You'll see them used quite a lot in this HTML area. Same with divs. They're also used they just mean it's just short for divider, so they can use for any sort of purpose. But this element here has two classes, one called mtiff and one called mtiffcog. And what Microthemer has done is it's chosen the class for targeting mtiffcog. Basically, what the difference between the two in this instance is mtiff is used on all icons, all that are created using a font icon, and mtiffcog is just specifically for this cog. And so Microthemer doesn't know, because it depends on your particular requirements, whether you want to target all the cog items or you want to create a selector that targets any type of icon. So what it does is it has an algorithm for prioritizing these selectors, so it's chosen cog over just mtiff, but it's fairly arbitrary. There'll be occasions when actually what you want is to target the mtiff thing, and so that's kind of why I'm trying to teach you how to understand some of this, what the HTML here means and how these CSS selector suggestions relate to it. So in this case, if there are multiple icons in this section and you wanted to set the color for all of them, you would choose this option rather than the one that just targets the cog. And if you wanted to create a selector that targets all icons with this class of mtiff, which would be all of them on the whole site, and you didn't even want to specify that they were in this particular section here with our ordered list, you could delete that portion of it, or you could have a look for it wouldn't be in this list actually, because this only targets this only targets icons in this section, but you would look down, say, at this list here, and target, say, this one here. It looks like there's 10 elements on the page that have this class of mtiff, so you could choose either the default option where the page context is defined, or scroll down and just choose this option here. So yeah, sometimes obviously it's easier to just customize it by hand. Sometimes you might find it's easier to search for the selector in the list. It depends on the context. You might also notice that there are more suggestions when we clicked on this icon here than compared to, say, when we click on, or was it the list element, the ordered list element, which didn't have so many. And that's just basically because Microthemer scans up the document, looks at all of the classes on the container elements and the IDs and the tag name, and it just tries to find related elements. So it looks like it's found 3 unordered list items on the page, and you can see there's one here, there's one up there, and there's one probably down here, yeah. And there aren't loads of ordered list item elements on this page, whereas there were lots of span elements. So that's why sometimes you'll see a different number of suggestions here. Moving on to this section here, we've got a computed tab and a styles tab. The computed tab just shows you the final computed values that the browser has determined. So in this instance, for say padding top and padding left, you can see it's got 100 on the top and below, and 80 pixels padding on the sides. And if we look at this tab, this shows us the actual CSS rules that were written to create this padding. And so we can see that it says padding 10 rem and 8 rem. And so that's where there's a bit of a difference. The computed information it always converts whatever 10 rem is to a pixel unit, and the calculation here is 100. Sometimes it's useful to know the specific unit. Certainly, sometimes when you're dealing with percentages, you might want to know that if, say, some columns have been set at 25%, and you want to match the width of these columns, it's useful to know that they were set at 25%. So you can write the same when you're adding some styles in Microthemer, because just knowing the pixel value, you don't want to set some columns in pixels, which is a fixed width, when the other columns are set in a percentage, which means they'll expand and collapse depending on the available width of the screen. So that's why Microthemer gives you both information, because depending on your particular task, it's useful to have either one or the other. And scrolling down, we've got this pane here for key information. It's just when you're designing, there are certain things that you very frequently want to find out, like what the font size is, so that you can match the font size used in one place somewhere else. And the background color, sometimes the background color has been set on an element, and you might have what we call very tight nesting, where there's an element inside an element inside an element, and page builders use this quite frequently. And you're not sure exactly in the whole stack of nested elements where a particular setting has been placed. And so this information here will give you information. You can see, okay, so the blue color has been set on this particular element. This is the one I'm going to set a new color on. And then if we scroll down, there's just information about all of the CSS properties that Microthemer supports via the UI. So all of this is available here for quick inspection. So I think that covers basically all of these controls here for inspecting the HTML and looking at the suggestions Microthemer has for targeting that HTML and making changes where necessary. And generally just understanding a little bit about what's going on the page already. So yeah, I hope that's been helpful. Thanks for watching.